Is it the band were? It's like, because it's plural, right? The band. Okay.
Oh, yeah. I guess the band was vocally unhappy.
Yeah. Is it like the collective singular, or is it the individual plural?
Yeah. No, you're right, Ralph.
Okay. You're the one with the fucking English degree, man.
You're right, Ralph. Just fucking read it, you fucking asshole.
Welcome to Backtracking, the show where two old friends take a second listen to influential bands' catalogs track by track. I'm Roth Bagdasarian.
And I'm Dan Fiden. We'll be taking this journey together, providing context, both personal and historical, on some legendary bands. For our first season, we've picked none other than Rush.
Today on Backtracking, we're like a couple of flies on the wheel saying, what a lot of dust we're raising, because we're tackling 2002's Test for Echo, one of Rush's most challenging albums. Their 17th studio album was the result of a marathon recording process that followed the most difficult time in their lives together.
It sure was, Roth. Much has been written about the tragedies that befell Neil Peart following the 1997 conclusion of the tour supporting Test for Echo, most notably Peart's own memoir, Ghost Rider. But to restate the basics, just a month after completing the tour, Peart's daughter was killed in a car wreck, and less than a year after that, Peart's wife died of cancer. At his daughter's funeral, Pratt told his bandmates, quote, "Consider me retired." And from that point forward, the future of the band was in serious doubt. After Peart's wife died, he embarked on a solitary, open-ended motorcycle ride that eventually spanned 55,000 miles. His only communication with Geddy and Alex was via postcards, which they would occasionally receive. But after returning to Canada from Belize, the terminus of his road trip, Peart expressed desire to start working with Rush again. Geddy, who had recorded his first solo record, My Favorite Headache, during the sabbatical, was pleased.
And so was Alex. But they were also trepidatious. After such a long break, would Rush be able to rediscover their legendary musical chemistry? In early 2001, they reconvened at Reaction Studios in Toronto to find out. The boys eventually settled on a schedule that would see them working 3 weeks of each month and would involve no one outside the band other than a technical assistant. About 8 months later, they were joined by a new producer, Paul Northfield, who had worked as an engineer on a number of Rush albums beginning with 1980's Permanent Waves. The recording of Vapor Trails was finally completed in December of 2001. And the album was released in March of 2002. The band was vocally unhappy with the album's mix, however, and had it remixed and re-released in 2013.
So what else did we have to be vocally unhappy about in 2002? The first detainees arrive at Guantanamo, and Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Pearl is abducted and murdered in Pakistan. Elizabeth Smart is kidnapped from her home in Utah, and Star Wars Attack of the Clone premieres. The Department of Justice initiates an investigation into Enron, and Kelly Clarkson is named the first American Idol, narrowly defeating Justin Guarini's fancy haircut.
That was a depressing script, man. I mean, like war, death, and it's all topped off with Justin Guarini's fancy haircut.
I know, but do you remember that haircut?
I do. It's
quite a haircut.
I forgot about it until you wrote it.
It presaged the very popular broccoli haircut that all the kids are wearing these days. Have you seen this broccoli haircut?
I have. And you know, the mullet, I don't know if the mullet's still back. It was in style a couple of years ago.
I think that you'd look great with a broccoli haircut, Roth. Have you ever thought about it? Getting a perm, maybe a nice tight perm?
It haunts my dreams, Dan. And it's something that I've been in therapy trying to resolve and get past. So thanks for bringing it up. Yeah, so let's get into this.
All right. Yeah, this is a dark. I mean, this was a challenging album to cover. For me, it was challenging for a couple of different reasons. One, I was completely unfamiliar with the album. Two, I found the album musically a little inaccessible, but we can get into that more later. And three, it's just dark. It's uncharacteristically dark for the band. I mean, people talk about how Grace Under Pressure is a dark album. It is kind of nothing compared to this one.
Well, they had a motivation for it to be dark, and it's not just dark in its subject matter and its tone, but also in the sound.
Yeah.
This was the album we have discussed. We had sort of dropped hints of it in the past that we'd talk about it when we get to it. But there was the original release, which came out in 2002, and I remember listening to it and just being like, "What the fuck?" Right? So let me give you a little bit of personal context. You know how we talked about how we both sort of left Rush for a spell, primarily with Counterparts and Test for Echo, and we went back to those albums. We're really pleased with it. Well, this was the album where I knew about Rush was getting back together. I made an effort to go out there the day it was released to get it. This was when I returned to Rush. Actually, I would even say earlier, what got me back into Rush, believe it or not, is My Favorite Headache. When that album came, like, I really like that album. Like, I listen to it regularly. It's a really great album. It was weird. I felt like I was cheating, on someone when I was listening to it, because it was just Ged and the other musicians. But it was a really good album, and what happened when I listened to it, it sort of defined that era of my life, right? And
so that was just to kind of set the setting for this. You were living in Los Angeles.
I was in LA, so I was on my own. I was an adult. I was ostensibly an adult.
Ostensibly, I underline ostensibly, but go ahead.
But I was, I wasn't in that, like, so I was settling in on my tastes, and I was revisiting, bands and artists that I once was really into, and I came back to Rush, and I think you always come back. And so when I came back to My Favorite Headache, I was actually really surprised at how much I liked it. The lyric writing, and it was Geddy, right? It was Geddy writing lyrics, and the music and the sound of it. It was evocative enough of Rush, obviously, because Geddy singing, but it was different enough where it's like, this isn't Rush. This is something wholly unique. I never really went deep with Victor, and I think I should do that. That's Alex Lifeson's album from several years earlier. But when this came out, I had read the book beforehand, and I was primed to get back to Rush, and I was relieved that they got back together. So I was
read Ghost Rider.
Yeah, I read Ghost Rider, the book. So there was a book that was written about the 55,000 mile journey that we mentioned in the opening script. And it's really great. It's, Neil Peart is known as being a very private individual, especially in public. But if you look at his lyrics and you read that book, he is not afraid to reveal his heart, right? He really isn't. He just is awkward face to face with people, but he's not like so private where like he's willing to give of himself, right? His family life is private. We might hear hints of it in the music, cryptically so very often, but he is an open book, quite literally, in Ghost Rider, the novel, the travelogue he wrote. And it's a really wonderful book, and I don't want to be depressing here, but if anyone experiences grief, and I think I mentioned this before, there are two books that I would read. One is Ghost Rider, and the other is Big Russ and Me, about Tim Russert's family and upbringing.
Mm-hmm. And then the third is Chicken Soup for the Retired Lady's Soul, right? Isn't that correct?
Miriam Adelman, or whatever that woman.
So I was very far afield from Rush by 2002. I had almost completely stopped listening to it, except for the occasional, I would occasionally put on one of the kind of earlier albums, prog era albums, and listen to it. But I really, at this point, was very, very far from Rush.
Yes, but you know what defined that era for me too, musically, were your mixtapes. Remember, you'd make those mixtapes, the Fight and Fall mix, and you would. Like for about 3-4 years, like those, like I looked forward to those, and they were. I think you should do it as a playlist, by the way. From now on.
Yeah. Well, I should, one of the things that I really enjoyed about doing that was making the kind of cover art and everything, but I will go back to it. I'd made some good mixes. Maybe I can even release one or two of them.
Your playlist can have custom art. There's nothing wrong with that.
I guess that's true. So, Ralph, why don't we, before we dig in on the album, let's just go through the basics. So we listened to or at least I primarily listened to the remastered digital edition that appears on Apple Music. It is 53 minutes and 32 seconds. We can talk about the whole remixing, that whole thing, why they did it when we get into the production. But for, just to set the table, the remastered digital edition that's on Apple is the remixed version. It is not the original mix. The original mix was released on May 14th, 2002. When was it certified gold by the RIAA, Roth?
Never.
Never. It was never certified gold. Now, I would imagine that's because the sales were maybe split between the two versions of the album. I didn't go deep enough into the stats to determine like whether they were aggregated into a single album, but I'm assuming they were not. And so I would imagine between the two versions of the album, it probably did go gold, but I don't have any substantiation for that. And it was obviously never certified platinum. So do you want to get into the cover art before we dive into the very rich kind of production arrangements overall sense that we have of the album? I've got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, and I want to say one thing too, just as a caveat. So, iTunes is weird. I have this album, the original mix, in my network storage drive. And when I was listening to it in the car and working out is where I listen to it the most, in headphones and in the car. I noticed that there were, between some songs, there were some very noticeable changes in volumes. And I think what was happening was that somehow I was getting different files from different versions in my folder, or was streaming some from their server, some from mine, or from the assets that were in my library. So I don't know, honestly, which version I listened to. What I do know, though, is that there were some songs where I was like, this is definitely the remix. And there were some where I was like, this is definitely the original mix. And since they sort of apply to the whole album, I'm just giving that caveat. So I did not listen, as I had made such a point of, I did not listen to both in their entirety, knowing that one was the old mix and one was it. What I could have done is I could have just gone to Spotify and listened to the remix, but that would have been too logical.
Yeah, we can talk about that a little bit here in a second, but the original version is available on YouTube if you look around. And I had listened to primarily the remixed version, but I did go back and listen to clips of the original version and compared them to the same song on the remix version, just to get a sense of what the sound difference was.
Yeah, let's talk about the original version. Do you want to talk about the production of this, or?
Why don't we go over the cover art first and just knock it out? Because I don't think there's a ton to discuss there, but we're going to have a lot to talk about with the production. So this cover, it is another Hugh Syme painting. Similar to Grace Under Pressure, Show of Hands. It is just purely a painting. There's no photography in here. It is a very simple, very clean representation of a comet with a vapor trail. It's not a very literal representation, but it is literal enough that you can see pretty obviously what they're going for. And I have to say, Roth, I actually love this cover. I think this is, of the Hugh Syme painting covers, it is by far my favorite. Now, there aren't a ton of the Hugh Syme painting covers. There's only, I think, 3. But you can include Caress of Steel in there if you want to just say illustrations as well. But I really like it. It's very simple, little bit abstract, but not too abstract, clean, nice.
Yeah, and you know what? It's the name of the album. So this is one of those album covers that really matches the name of the album and the content of the album, without being entirely on the nose. But it's obvious enough where you kind of get a sense of where the inspiration came from. And, when you think of, the analogy has been made before where, you look in the sky and every one of those is like, someone who's passed, a soul in the sky, like grandparents or ancestors. And the idea of the vapor trails is like a shooting star or a comet flying through space, that once it's passed, once a life is gone, it sort of leaves behind this vapor trail, sort of a shadow of what that life was. And it's to me, it's very clear that is sort of representative of not just what Neil Peart went through, but also the band as well. Because we had discussed this with the previous albums, that they were sort of prototypical, but then they had this huge break. And this album is sort of starting anew from where they last were. So this is about as hard a reset for Rush as we've ever gotten. Maybe the only other time we got such a hard reset might have been with Fly By Night, when they introduced Neil Peart.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the only other things I'd like to kind of point out, there's a nice story actually about the painting of this cover. Neil Peart, who I've gathered from a number of interviews with Hugh Syme that I've read about the covers of the various albums, Neil Peart really kind of played the role of creative director for the visuals for all of these albums. And when he was talking to Hugh Syme about what kind of a cover to do, they had tried a whole bunch of high resolution kind of astronomical photography that they had gotten through NASA and other places. But in the end, they kind of decided that they should do something a little more abstract. And while meeting in Indiana, actually, Hugh Syme did a finger painting of roughly what he thought it should kind of look like. And he was saying it would be a painting. And Neil said to him, nope, that's it. And he was like, no, I'll go back and do a really good version. And Neil was like, no, I want to use the literal one that you just did. So this is actually a finger painting that was done in the presence of Neil Peart while they were just talking about the collaboration, which I thought was a kind of fun bit of ephemera.
It's great too. I mean, that was a great decision. That was a great, call that he made there.
I like this cover. Now, inside of the album, if you looked at the interior art, the liner notes, one of the other things I think is great about the art in this album are the painted portraits of the band members. I don't know if you've seen these, Ralph, but
I have, yeah.
The portrait of Neil Peart is without a doubt the best image of Peart that I've seen really anywhere. I just think it's a lovely, lovely painting. I also think the painting of Geddy is really good. I don't like the painting of Alex quite so much. He's kind of got a little bit of a dorky smile on his face. The other two images are really quite kind of dark and kind of meditative. But
I mean, Geddy looks like he has a headache. I mean, so he still must have the headache from his last album. That was a joke.
But I do think that they're really good images of the band, especially considering it's a band that hasn't kind of over the course of their career excelled at finding and executing images of themselves that make themselves look particularly cool. The only other thing that I think is of note inside of the album is there are a whole bunch of images of tarot cards, which are direct references to the song Peaceable Kingdom. That appears on the album that mentions tarot cards a number of times. So overall, I think pretty good cover art in this one.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's up there. And the title treatment of the name of the band is really great too. It's new. We haven't seen it before. It's classic. It really fits in the way it's like laid out as well. It really fits the album cover really nicely. Yeah,
agreed. All right, so let's dive into the production, the overall. So, Ralph, I'll maybe just set the table and talk a little bit about Paul Northfield, and then maybe you could talk about the Loudness wars and really how you feel about the production and some of the issues with the production of the original version versus the remixed version. But Paul Northfield, it seems as though Paul Northfield, he got a co-producer credit on this. He joined the process later in the game than had been done on some of the earlier albums. He didn't join until all of the songs were kind of completed in Toronto and then ready to be recorded. So it was actually about halfway through their whole kind of production process on the album. He had previously worked with the band as an engineer as far back as Permanent Waves. He had worked with them on and off on a number of records. So they'd had a long relationship with Paul Northfield. And he'd never, he'd only played the role of producer for, from what I could tell, two bands that anyone might know. And he kind of continued to be producer for these two bands for most of their career. Number one is Suicidal Tendencies, which is not a band I think of when I think of amazing, interesting production. That's not the first band that pops to mind for me. And then the other one is a Canadian band that I suspect you remember, Ralph, called I Mother Earth.
Yeah, I Mother Earth.
Yeah, so anyway, you want to talk about the sound of the album and kind of go off on that whole thing? Because there's a lot of, I think, technical knowledge that you have that I don't.
I mean, not really, but I do remember listening to it, and I immediately noticed it just sounded muddy. I guess that's the only way to really put it. What happened between 96 and 2002, iTunes started to come into its own, digital distribution. So, and it was a really, really crappy time for the band to decide to produce the album on their own. If they could have used a little bit more technical acumen recording it, this probably would have been the time, because I don't think they really knew what they were getting into. So they did have a really great engineer, but it just sounds like they were a bit in over their heads in terms of the production and the producing of the album, and I think it shows. A producer, as we've discussed before, at least I love this sort of representation of what a producer is sort of the advocate for the listener, and I think they do need to be a little bit distanced from the band and from the writing of the music to do an effective job. And I think this is an example of, if you're too close to it, it can be it's not to say it's not possible, but it'd be very challenging, especially if you're a band in the sort of twilight or the adolescence of your career, and you've been working with these great producers. And we've seen, as we've been going through these albums, we've seen the mark and the importance the mark of the producer makes on these different albums, right? And I think that they lost something that they really needed.
Yeah, it's interesting. So there are a few things that struck me as I was listening to the album. I guess number one is I had the exact same conclusion. It's clear that you and I are not the only ones. It seems like the consensus here is that the production really on the original version, but on the remixed version as well, is just not great. It's not just the mix. It doesn't seem to me as though the core issue, it was mitigated in the second mix, but it wasn't solved. It's still a muddy, messy sounding album, which is interesting because it is one of the only Rush albums of the modern era. Actually, I think it is the only Rush album of the modern era, meaning, I'm gonna call the modern era post 1980. Which is the vast majority of their career, that has no keyboards on it at all. There is not a single keyboard instrument on this album at all. But it seems as though there's a lot more of they somehow tried to overcome that by a lot more guitars, like a lot more.
Yep.
The bass sounded very noisy to me.
Well, I think you're getting at. It had a very frenetic kind of vibe to it. Like they were strumming a lot. There was a lot of like 16th notes, and it felt like they were filling up the void with in a very frantic, sort of frenetic way. That's what I noticed. And in every song, it felt like.
Yeah, and I think it was a shame in some ways because I feel like the drumming on this album is really interesting and really good, but unusually for Rush, the drums really are low in the mix. And I think because, again, this was my interpretation, but I feel like there's way too much low end on this album. Primarily, I think the combination of Geddy's bass tone and the way he's playing and where it sits in the mix.
Absolutely.
Just give this very it's like a boomy, muddy low end that kind of overpowers everything else. The drums get really lost in it. Frequently the guitar gets lost in it, though not always. Sometimes it sticks out. And so I think everything just ends up having this undifferentiated kind of sound. Vocals, I think, are frequently too low. It's just it's like the album is all kind of like mid to low end, just rumble to me.
Yeah. And you know what, looking forward to the next album, you'll hear it's much cleaner. It's still rocking. It's still hard, but it's much more cohesive sonically. It's almost as if, they reforged the band, right, in the forge, and this is the album right when they came out where they were still charred, right? And the next albums, they're more polished, to use that metaphor, forging a sword.
It really, and it does feel like, the way the band is playing is not all that different from the last couple of albums. Really, if you think about Counterparts as kind of the beginning of a much more, we talked a little bit offline this week about Drop D and when they started using Drop D on the guitars and how much they used it. But if you think about Counterparts as the beginning of that, grungier metal or more metal kind of sounding Rush, the album's Counterparts and then the albums following, I actually think just they get cleaner and better. The production actually gets really good kind of by the time you hit, Test for Echo or so. And then this one is just this, it really just feels like kind of everything they'd figure out how to do about this new sound that they were developing by the time they hit Test for Echo. They just lost in the 3-4 year break that they I guess 6 year break that they took.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about how Test for Echo felt like a prototypical album, and if they had gone right into another one, we probably would have got a different version of Rush. This was a hard reset, and I think that this doesn't sound. It's interesting because Snakes and Arrows and Clockwork Angels, to me, are vastly different from this album. It's not like I don't see this being prototypical on their way to those other two albums. So I don't know where those other two albums really came from. Maybe this was sort of, them sort of, shaking off the tribulations of the past 6 years. And then they sort of, got back to where they were headed after Test for Echo. But these last three albums are really, really interesting. And this is why I've said, when we were talking about, the eras of Rush, Test for Echo was the last Rush album. And everything else that came after were sort of project albums, right? Yeah. And I kind of see this as a project album, and then they did another, and that's the way I think the band was treating each album. They're like, okay, let's do it. If we feel like doing another album, we'll do another album. Whereas before, I think they knew that, okay, we got another album we got to put out within the next year or two. I think these last three albums are kind of project albums.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Ralph, I want to talk a little bit about the lyrics, the lyrical content of this album, and how it connects to the music that's on the album. I'm going to talk about it here because it's an overall observation that I have. I'll certainly kind of hit on some of this stuff in the individual songs as well. But, I have been one of the disappointments of the past couple of albums. I would probably say I've been overall mostly disappointed with the lyrical output since Presto, kind of.
Okay.
And I think it's gotten worse with each subsequent album. I really liked the lyrics on this album, not the execution of the lyrics on every single song, but I think, again, as a result of this tragedy, which you wouldn't wish on anyone, Peart ends up writing these like much more personal, raw lyrics than I think he has throughout the rest of his career. It really, sometimes I think you can make a criticism of Peart that he's like articulate, literate, interesting, has things to say, all of those things, but he can be a little clinical sometimes, right? You don't really kind of smell the blood and the bone in the lyrics that he tends to write. It's just a little antiseptic. That is not the case on this album. When he is talking about his emotions and things associated with, you assume associated with the tragedies that kind of hit his family, you feel it in a much more raw way than you do on the other albums. And so for me, I love that. I think that of all of the things about this album, the lyrics are probably my favorite thing.
Yeah, I agree. They're deeply personal. Yeah, deeply personal, and they're inventive. And I think I'm wondering how much of that has to do with the fact that he was writing a lot. I mean, he wasn't playing drums when he was on this 55,000 mile journey, but he was writing. He was reading a lot. So he. I think he was first and foremost a lyricist on this. And even when we go forward to Clockwork Angels, I mean, that's also based on a science fiction novel that he co-wrote. So he clearly, I think he was anticipating retiring from drumming and was planning on being a writer and exercising that muscle more than percussion. So it makes sense that the lyrics have a little bit more focus and a little bit more tender, loving care. So I have a question for you about the track listing. So do we know what's side 1 and what's side 2?
I do know that, but if you'll indulge me, I have a second part to my lyric comment
please, yes.
This overall thing. Okay, so I've said that I really like the lyrics, and I think that they're very interesting. We've also talked in the past about how Rush has what I think, I don't know how unusual this is, but it always struck me as a little bit unusual. Geddy and Alex would be separate from Neil, working on riffs and songs. They would kind of piece together different parts of songs into like a cohesive song. And then Neil would hand them lyrics, just a set of lyrics, and they would fit those lyrics to the songs or song fragments they had already written, right? So it's a very kind of disconnected music from lyrics process that Rush kind of has used since, I think they adopted this in like Permanent Wave. Once they started doing that kind of like, going to Toronto and working, during the week and then going home on the weekends, it seems like that's when they kind of started doing that. Right. I feel like that process really failed them on this album in a way that it hasn't on some of the other albums. I think because the lyrics tend to be so personal and poignant and sometimes sad, I don't know how to say this. I feel like the lyrics frequently feel completely disconnected from the music in this. And in fact, on some songs, I feel like Geddy is just kind of trying to jam the words in, like make them fit. There's really no flow. It's like he's trying to figure out a way to get all these words in to whatever the music is that they happen to have written. And it just, they don't have a rhythmic or melodic or tonal connection frequently. And I really found that disconcerting.
I totally agree with you. And it feels like there's not as much thought or invention to the melodies. There are a couple of songs where we hear brief moments of it. How It Is a good example, right? And in the chorus. Yeah. But for the most part, it's like one little victory, da 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 da. It's very sophomoric. It feels like.
They don't feel like they don't feel like melody driven songs or lyrically driven songs. They just feel like it's kind of the cart is in front of the horse, and I don't know which is the horse and which is the cart really in here.
Well, yeah, I mean, think of like a song that came to mind was like Bastille Day. There's no bread, letting me cake. There's no end to what they'll take. Flaunt the fruits of noble birth, and it just has this beautiful flow to it, right? And that's missing on this. I agree.
And I actually think Bastille Day is a really good example of a song where the music feels reflective of what they're singing about. There is that very martial chorus in Bastille Day that completely fits with the theme of, they're marching to and they're marching to Bastille Day. It feels like it could be a march for the people. You know what I mean? It really feels cohesive in a way that I just did not feel like any of the songs on this album did.
So you know what? I think we should just review Caress of Steel. Caress of Steel. We should just guys. We're gonna do a Caress of Steel part 2 here. No.
I think the last thing I'm gonna say on this topic is I just kept on thinking it would be amazing if Rush just made a completely unapologetically sad record. They never did that through their career. You know what I mean? Like, can you imagine if like there was just like Rush just made like a very dark, like
Red House Painters type of album,
Drake, or something. You know what I mean? Like suddenly, like occasionally they'll do these more kind of like soft, sad songs over the course of their career, but it really felt like if ever there was a time where the lyrics and kind of where they were personally demanded that, it was on this album. And it really feels like that is kind of exactly not the direction that the music took. It took a very like aggro, metally, prog, like good, interesting in a lot of ways, but didn't seem suited.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're if Neil Peart's lyrics say anything, even Ghost Rider, even the notion of vapor trails, there's always optimism, right? And I think that's innate to who they are. So I think it would be very difficult for them to just do a sad album. I think there would have to be some ray of hope or optimism in there, because I think that's just who they are intrinsically.
Yeah. All right, Roth, why don't we dig into the tracks? We've spent a long time in the preamble. I for one, I'm going to tell you, I have less to say about the individual tracks on this one than I do about the overall.
Well, there are a lot of them, so
we'll knock them out. But this is a 4-sided vinyl. But because we have a little bit less to say about this one, we're going to do this as 2 episodes. It'll be side A and B, and then side C and D for the second episode on this album. But why don't we just dive right into it? Side A, track 1, One Little Victory, 5 minutes and 8 seconds. Leon Lifeson, Peart the lyrics. Let's dig in.
Right. So this, I was talking about optimism, right?
Yeah.
It starts off with like a hard hitting, right? With a real, driving guitar riff.
Yep.
But the song lyrically and thematically is about, celebrating the little wins, right? Celebrating overcoming obstacles. So they start off with an optimistic theme. Because think about it, context. The people who bought this, who were Rush fans, knew that the band was reuniting after a pretty horrendous tragedy, right, for one of their members. And I think this is the band telling us there's optimism. We're back. We're optimistic. We're hopeful. Let's rock. That's kind of what the song is saying.
Yeah, I didn't think about it that way, but I agree with you, Ralph. I think that's that does make sense to me. I think that this is kind of classic Puritan theme, right? It is a well-constructed Neil Peart kind of in his sweet spot. The song is about go ahead and take these risks. You're going to fail sometimes, but if you have the guts to pursue and accept and kind of celebrate the small victories in life, they stack up. So you just need to kind of focus on get those wins as you can. It is to your point, optimistic. And I think it's Peart in kind of his classic form as a teacher or like a life coach or light philosopher maybe. But, I think that this is really kind of classic Peart.
Yeah. And like, I'll read you a small line, right? A certain measure of innocence, a willingness to appear naive, a certain degree of imagination, a measure of make-believe. And if you read the book Ghostwriter too, Neil Peart it's no secret he's an atheist. He chose free will. And really what that journey was him processing this loss in a very secular way. So it's, and I think what he's talking about in here, or let me not say he's not hitting it on the nose, but I think what's informed the lyrics is the tools that he discovered and that he used to come to accept the tragedy of his wife and his daughter having passed.
Yeah. Makes sense. I
mean, there's no way that wasn't the overarching theme of everything having to do with this album.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I mean, it really is kind of pretty plain in a number of different places, but
yeah, and it's also cathartic too. The fact, like, I mean, they were probably all a little, apprehensive as to what is this going to mean? What are we going to sound like? How are we going to work together again? Right.
Yeah. They do talk about that in quite a different, they talk about that in a number of different interviews and it was very unclear to the band that they were going to be able to collaborate again. And
mm-hmm.
I didn't mention this up front, but they spent 3 weeks in the studio together without even picking up instruments at the beginning of these sessions, just discussing how they wanted to collaborate, what they wanted this album to be, how they wanted it to sound. And it wasn't until after that 3 weeks that they actually started working on lyrics, started working on music. Speaking of music, Ralph, let's talk about the music here.
Yeah.
First, discuss, obviously this is a very heavy guitar here. We can talk about that. But really, the only thing that I really wanted to comment on is there is this Geddy doing falsetto where you can hear the flip into falsetto in the chorus. And I don't think that's he's ever done that ever in his career. It is so interesting that he did that where, he flips into falsetto, but you intentionally hear the flip, right? Like he goes up. It might not be an octave, but it's like he goes up like one victory. One little victory.
I did that all in falsetto though.
Yeah. So you hear that and it's interesting. I like that he's trying things like that at this point in his career.
It sounds like a mistake though.
I don't like it. It doesn't sound kind of controlled in the way that like when Jeff Buckley would do all these kind of acrobatics, it just always sounded, there was kind of like no question. He kind of had control over that instrument. Yeah. It doesn't really sound that way for Geddy, but I'll give him points for trying.
It's interesting because, I think that they're going for sort of a more anthemic sort of approach here, and I think if you had like a Bon Scott, or Brian Johnson singing it, like screaming it out, I think it would have more of that vibe to it. And it sounded like he was reaching beyond his abilities as a vocalist.
Yeah, which I think sometimes can work, right? I think you hear occasionally, you'll hear, especially in like metal or older metal, you'll hear people kind of go into this like pure screech. Axl Rose is a great example. He has such a weird voice, but like frequently you can tell he just kind of is blowing his voice out. But that's kind of part of the thing, right? That you like about it.
Yeah, and go back to Bastille Day. The guillotine has claimed her bloody prize, and he goes up to that high note, and that worked, right? He was in the same range, and imagine if he went up and he switched to falsetto when he did that, it wouldn't work as well.
Yeah. Okay. So, and other than that, I think what strikes me about this song is it's just heavy, heavy, heavy guitar. I mean, Alex is playing guitar.
Yeah.
You see glimpses of this really, again, starting with Counterparts, but gosh, he starts to sound like a guitarist for Slipknot or something. You know what I'm saying? Like, it is like I don't want to say it's like prog metal. I know there's a name for these more like post-dream.
New metal is what.
Was it new metal?
New metal.
It is like it really feels evocative of that to me. And it's very interesting to hear Alex in this mode. It's not the mode that I think of for Alex and maybe not the mode that I love for Alex, but it just shows, it shows kind of what a broadly capable, musician he is.
Yeah. And remember, the last thing that he recorded was Victor, and it was was Victor was before Test for Ecto, wasn't it?
Victor was before Test for Echo.
Okay, yeah.
And then in this 6-year break, really the only thing that was done in this 6-year break was
My Favorite Headache. Yeah.
Getty Solo. So,
well, let's go on, because I think musically, like honestly, and this is kind of a problem. We'll talk about the elephant in the room. Musically, it's a lot of the same notes. It's a lot of the same comments. So I think we'll focus on when there's something notable that we hadn't yet commented on, or if it's worth repeating for a specific reason, we'll get back to it. But why don't we move on to Ceiling Unlimited, which is track number 2, Dan?
Yep. All right, let's do it. You want to give it an intro, Ralph, or you want me to?
Yeah, this is Ceiling Unlimited, track number 2 off of Rush Vapor Trails. It comes in at 5 minutes, 28 seconds, and let's give it a listen.
All right, Ralph. So let's talk about the lyrics here.
Yes,
I am going to kind of just lay this out with you. There are some turns of phrase in here that feel very Neil Peart, right? It's not the heat, it's the inhumanity.
Yes, I love that line.
It's a very Neil Peart line, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to say whether I think it's, I don't think it's particularly effective, but there's no question that's the kind of like, twist on a turn of phrase that he frequently does. But I read these lyrics, and this has happened to me a couple of times in the last few albums. He's clearly writing about something. There is strong intent behind these lyrics, and you get hints of like this dissatisfaction with the culture, something, but I just can't really put my finger on what exactly it is that he's saying.
Yeah, I think it has to do with breaking down boundaries. I mean, think about it, and a big part of his life since the previous album and before this has to do with the journey he took, that 55,000-mile ride. And I can imagine being on a stretch of land, maybe seeing the Sierras or the Rockies in the distance and driving through Alaska and then down to Mexico and Belize. I can imagine there were moments where you would, it would be tedious, but I think there were other moments where you would just have this exhilaration for being on the road and feeling like the future is wide open, right? Which he must not have felt a lot in the years prior. So I think that this is really about, when he's saying ceiling, I think he's talking about like the ceiling of the sky, right?
Yeah.
And that it's unlimited, and just I can totally imagine feeling so small that and seeing these vast landscapes in front of you, that this is, this feeling of freedom, of breaking free, right? So I think that's what the song is fundamentally about. And it does have that feel. And this is one of those moments where I think the lyrics and the music do achieve that in the chorus. When they're singing "Winding like an ancient river, hope is like an endless river."
No, I think if you were to take the last four stanzas of the song, I think that interpretation makes a lot of sense. But I don't feel like that's connected in any clear way, at least in my mind, to the first couple of stanzas, for example. Machine gun images pass like malice through the looking glass. If culture is the curse of the thinking class,
it starts off bleak. Yeah, it starts off very bleak.
But it's bleak in a way. Yeah, it's bleak about like the world. Anyway, I don't want to try to interpret it here, but what I will say is that I think that these lyrics work better, even in a song like this, work better than some of the previous songs, because they do feel so raw and real. And there's like real emotion behind them. It's not quite so intellectual, but I think in the case of this one, it makes it a little harder for me to parse, actually.
No, but the thing is, and he doesn't do this often, right? At least not, maybe he does and I'm just not seeing it. But this song is like a story that progresses. It starts off with like the man he was, going through changes. Accepting those changes means an opportunity for personal growth. And I think that he's basically talking about where he was, how he changed, and where he sees himself going. So I think this is one of those songs that does have to be looked at like sort of in a linear fashion, like as progressing towards something, because I think the earlier lyrics in the earlier stanzas are much bleaker and less hopeful and optimistic. And if you read through it, there is like a character transformation over the course of this quote story, end quote.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Ralph, what about the music here? What do you have to say about the music?
So I do, again, when he does sing, it's not the heat, it's the inhumanity. Like that's a moment where the vocals and the lyrics and the music are in balance. They're in bloom. And I do like the chorus of this. We're starting to hear a little bit of melody. And it works, but at the same time, musically, this is probably like Exhibit A in the frenetic pace of the playing. It's just very frenetic, and I feel it could have, it needed time and space to breathe a little bit, and I think it would have served the song better.
Yeah, I found the music here to be unremarkable, uninteresting, and ill-suited to the lyrics.
I'll say this.
I mean, just
I know exactly what I feel about the music, because I played in bands. So I played in bands, and I'm thinking of one in particular, a bunch of them actually in particular. When I was younger, and there was some.
Was it Goof Roth?
That was one of them, but like me and Bob the Jennings, right?
Yeah.
The songwriting was really solid. It was really great songwriting.
Yeah.
And the musicianship and the people that were playing the music were more than capable of playing the music and realizing it in a really unique way. The problem was we didn't have the discipline or the guidance from a producer, let's say, to really orchestrate what we played and what we didn't play and when. And the result of that were we'd have these songs that were really great songs, and if they were sort of produced with the hand of someone more capable, or even produced, we just very often just would record it and be like, okay, mix it, and that's it. They would be served much better. I feel, and what you end up getting is like what I call sort of a freight train, right? The train starts and you just can't stop it, and everyone's doing their thing, and it just goes and goes and goes.
Yeah.
And you're playing over each other, and I kind of feel this is sort of like one of those freight train songs. I feel a lot of the songs on this album are like that. And that's why it's no surprise, that we said there was no producer on this. The band was doing it themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. No, completely agree with that, Roth. All right. Can we move on to Ghost Rider? Because I actually think this is one of the more interesting songs. And this is really the song I will preview. This is the song on the album where I kind of went through these lyrics and I was just like, oh my God, like this is what a tragedy. This is incredibly sad. But let's get into it, Roth. Ghost Rider, 5 minutes and 41 seconds. Lee Lifeson, Peart lyrics, of course. Let's give it a shot.
The thing that impressed me the most about this song is that your time, 5 minutes, 41 seconds, is the time I have. I think that's the first time this entire podcast where we have the same time on the album. Okay, so let's move on to Peaceable Kingdom.
So, all right. So this song is really, I think, the most obviously about Peart's state, Peart's tragedies. There is not a lot to parse here. It's straightforward. He's talking about that ride. He is talking about what he's grappling with on that ride. But I will tell you, the section of this song, like literally almost made me cry when I was reading the lyrics and listening to the song. And
I think I know what you're going to say.
This is not like this is not music that just like music can make you cry. Like, you know what I mean? It's not that type of song. Sunrise on the road behind, sunset on the road ahead. There's nothing to stop you now. Nothing can stop you now. And it is, I don't know if this is the way you read the nothing can stop you now, that little couplet there. That's generally used as a very optimistic thing. You think of a kid on the road. There's nothing you can go and do anything. But I interpreted this as a lament by him that he wishes his wife and daughter were there to stop him from going on this road. On this road trip. You know what I mean?
Oh, wow.
If he had a family, he wouldn't be able to go on a 55,000 mile road trip.
I think I never considered that. And I think that's what he was writing there.
Yeah.
That would be Neil Peart's turn. That would be.
Exactly. That is the knife turn that he does so well in so many lyrics, but it is crushingly sad.
And honestly, like I would say that's like I can say I've never considered that until you just mentioned it, but I would say that's like a masterwork right there of lyrics.
Yeah, no, I mean, really, really beautiful. Yeah. And it is like Peart at his, Peart doing that Peart thing, that knife turn, right? He's taking a turn of phrase that we all know. You're a little bit, using it differently. But in this case, he's not doing that to kind of like be smart, to articulate something. He is really just, this is pure personal lament.
Well, and I think what gives that away is that there's nothing to stop you now. And then it says nothing can stop you now. I think there's nothing to stop you now, because this is not a song that's about, because you're right. Usually that's used to like indicate like, nothing's gonna stop us now. Like that Starship song, where it's optimistic.
Exactly the opposite of that.
Yeah, that's the fact that there's nothing to stop you now. It's like because think about too what they've sang about, or what he's written about in past albums when his child and his wife were alive. There was a lot about how they were grounding, how he felt bad about being on the road too long, and and now he's free of that. But that's not a good thing. It's not an optimistic thing. It is a lament. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and I think for that reason, I mean, this song really, in my mind, the first two songs, especially the first song, right? One Little Victory, it is optimistic. And it does feel as though there's some intention by the band, perhaps, to say to you, hey, listen, life goes on. This is this is an optimistic album, or there's reason to be optimistic. But I think this song is really the soul of what this album is. You know what I mean?
Well, and he was alone on that journey. Like he was alone, and he would occasionally like send postcards, but no one could get a hold of him. Yeah, he was truly alone for those 55,000 miles.
Yeah, and when I read this, I just imagined when I kind of thought about that line, and the way that I interpreted that line as kind of meaning, I wish there was someone to stop me. I just was thinking about all those other songs that we had talked about where it's like, it's hard being away from my family and on the road, and I know that's a strain on my relationship. And you can imagine Neil Peart at some point during a fight with his wife, God, I wish they weren't. Yeah, I wish I didn't have a wife, so I didn't have to deal with this bullshit while I'm out on the road trying to make a living. That's a thing that you might think, right? In a weak moment or whatever, like you're really pissed off. Everyone has had a moment like that, right?
Not me.
But you can imagine something like this happens, how just filled with guilt he would be over a moment like that, and how awful he would feel about that. And I know that I'm really kind of going like deep in how dark this is, but I love that. I love that it is so emotionally raw and honest. And I just think that is like, without a doubt, the thing that recommends this album is the level of emotional rawness that is demonstrated by Peart, which is just something that he doesn't do very often.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's, thank you for that take on it. Cause I think you're absolutely right. That's awesome. So music. All right. So I actually really dig the opening groove, and I like the way the vocals come in. It's a very driving song, which I think is suitable and appropriate for the subject matter. And, it's evocative of the journey of the motorcycle ride, across the North America. So I think the music works really, really well. It still is, it was a little muddled sounding. It could be a little crisper, a little clearer. And I think that would service the song much better. But the lyrics aren't like super melodic. He doesn't sing super melodically, but it fits the lyrics, the lack of melody. It's sort of like trance-like, or sort of like chant-like in its songs and its singing style.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. My comment on the music here is that this really is one of the better vocal performances on the album. I feel like the vocal lines and his delivery of the vocal lines matches the lyric. Like tonally, it is, I think, one of the most coherent songs on the album. Because I don't think there are very many tonally coherent songs on this album, actually. But and so, like, I'm saying that I think that it fits together well. That isn't particularly high praise, because I don't think that happens very often and very well on the album across the board. But this is one of the high points. My only other thought on this one is, again, I think it goes to kind of a weak producer, or a lack of an external producer, maybe. It just is too long overall. There's too much. This song and both the music, really primarily the music, doesn't warrant the length of the song, in my opinion. It doesn't. It just feels like there's too much stuff. They should have stripped it.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is very, again, it's the freight train syndrome. This is a little less freight trainy than some of the other songs, like Ceiling Unlimited. Yeah. But yeah, I think that what shines in this clearly is the lyrics, the personal journey. This is about as close to the heart as it gets for this album. I mean, it's about the book. It's about everything Neil Peart was going through. Right on the nose, right? Everything else is sort of ancillary or sort of side to that. And it is a great song. And I really enjoy listening to it. And I think I'm going to enjoy listening to it more, knowing that refrain, what it means. So I'm excited to listen to it again.
Well, all right, Raf, with that, why don't we move on to side B of the album? This is the first track on side B. The song is Peaceable Kingdom, 5 minutes and 23 seconds. Leon Lifeson music, Peart lyrics. Let's give it a try. All right, Ralph, let's talk about the lyrics for this one first.
Okay.
I had some really positive things to say about the lyrics to Ghost Rider, the previous track. I actually think probably across the board, these lyrics are as good as Ghost Rider, but in a very different way. This is not so much a song about in my opinion, this is not so much a song that has anything to do with Peart and what Peart is going through during this time. I think this is a 9/11 song.
Yeah, it is a 9/11 song. I was going to say that it is a 9/11 song.
Yeah, which is, but I mean, thematically, I think it fits with the album, even though it isn't about the specific issue that Peart is dealing with, because it's a dark 9/11 song and not in the way that you would necessarily expect, right? It isn't primarily a lament about the people who died in it's more of a lament on
the response
that this happened, the response, and like whether there is hope to change any of this, right?
Yeah, and I think it's right there in the name, right? And I think Peaceable Kingdom is intentionally chosen to be sort of Judeo-Christian, Islamic almost, right? So I think there is a lot of meaning to the name of the song, but it is, I mean, just in the chorus, talk of a peaceable kingdom, talk of a time without war. We had a very long period of peace and prosperity leading up to this. And even greed. And they talked about those themes in prior albums. And then this happens, and we just keep this sort of vicious cycle going. And I think that's kind of what he's talking about. It's a lament of, and I don't think it's not political either. I think it's just like Neil Peart is so wont to do. I think it's just an observation of the human condition, that there's certain things that, if A happens, then B is sure to follow, then C is sure to follow. Not because people are choosing that, but because our humanity gives us no other choice but to follow those paths. And I think there's certain people like Neil Peart who can see that for what it is and lament the fact that we're doomed to repeat those same mistakes. Yeah. And I think that's kind of what the song is saying. It's not critical. Like, it's not being critical of the political response necessarily. And it's not saying that, we should just turn the other cheek, but it is saying, here we go again. Like, that's almost what the song's saying.
Yeah. And I think there is a deep sense of hopelessness and pessimism about the notion that in the first line he describes as he capitalizes rational view, right? So all this time we're talking and sharing our capitalized rational view. So clearly, like, this is, he's providing additional weight there. But then he says, a billion other voices are spreading other news. He's basically saying, like, we can talk about peace all we want. We can talk about, it, but it just feels like we're outnumbered, every time.
Some lyrics. I want to read a lyric here. All this time we're burning like bonfires in the dark. A billion other blazes are shooting off their spark. Every spark, a drifting ember of desire to fall upon the earth and spark another fire.
Yep.
And I think that says it all. How do you fight those embers? Like you're overwhelmed.
Agreed.
Right?
Agreed. Yeah, but I think very evocative lyrics, unusual lyrics, especially thinking about how soon after 9/11 this song came out. It's an unusually articulate, nuanced, and pessimistic kind of a 9/11 song. Whereas I think a lot of the songs that kind of were about 9/11 in the 12 months following 9/11, there's a lot more like, Yeehaw America, and a lot of just pure tragedy, right? The pure tragedy of the attack. But there wasn't, or at least I'm not familiar with other songs that kind of take this particular view. It's similar in a way, Raf, to the song, I'm going to forget the name of it, but there was a song about the conclusion of the Cold War that appeared on...
No, I was gonna say if the Russians love their children too, but it's
no. It was a Rush song that appeared about the conclusion of the Cold War.
Heresy. It was Heresy.
Yes, Heresy.
Yeah.
That's right. That song. It has the same kind of weirdly nuanced, somewhat more pessimistic view of this event. He takes a slightly askance kind of look at it.
He doesn't hit it on the nose. I mean, he's talking about the persistent presence of conflict, right, and the complexities of human nature, and it's really almost like a call for reflection about it. So it's not necessarily, there was another song that came out that I think was saying the same kind of thing, probably a little bit more it was articulated much better, and the music was far more nuanced and subtle, and it was the Billy Joel song "We Didn't Start the Fire." I'm kidding about all those things I said about it, but it is kind of like we didn't start the fire, right? It's acknowledging that this always happens. Like we're mired in this sort of like cauldron of conflict. But as humans, we're also saying at the same time, we're incredulous that we're in this cauldron of conflict. He's like, no, this is persistent. It always exists. And this is just the next major event in that cauldron.
Yeah. Now, Ralph, let's talk about the music a little bit. Do you want to dig into this?
Yeah.
I would say that I think that the music that I think tends to be prevalent, the type of music that they're making on this album, aggressive, a little bit off kilter, thick, it fits best with these lyrics. I think that this song is the best lyrical musical fit on the album.
Yeah.
Because it, you know what I mean? I feel like it just so happened that the lyrics that he wrote here go with what Geddy and Alex were writing at this time. Whereas I think in most of the rest of the songs, it just doesn't. But what would you say about these? About this
I actually really love the chorus, like the bass line and the vocals and the draw. Like, because again, they pull back. It's like the freight train is like it's orchestrated there, right? So they put some time into that orchestration, and I think they did it as well as anyone else could have done, any other producer. But I love the bass sound. I love the way the blend of the band is during the chorus of this song. And like I said, there are moments where they achieve what I think they should have achieved, or they would have achieved more of had they a producer. But this is one of those tracks where I think we're hearing like a more refined version of Rush, whereas most, back to that metaphor, you just pulled the iron out of the forge, right? But you might see a little bit of polished metal, right? That's a little bit of the polished metal we see there.
Yeah. All right, Ralph, are we ready to move on to The Stars Look Down?
Well, I think we are. The Stars Look Down. This is track number 5. Second track off of side B, comes in at 4 minutes, 28 seconds. It's called The Stars Look Down.
What is the meaning of this? And the stars look down. What are you trying to do? And the stars look down. Was it something I said? And the stars look down. Like the rat in a maze.
All right, Ralph, I am going to start the discussion on the lyrics to this song with a question for you.
Yes.
Is this song the anti-free will? Is this song the complete opposite or bookend kind of sentiment that he was articulating in Free Will?
Well, I mean, it's based on the A.J. Cronin book, The Stars Look Down, right?
Oh, I didn't know that. Tell me more.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about that.
I mean, it's a novel about the struggle of coal miners in a small English town. It explores themes of social injustice, exploitation, harsh realities of working class life, right? So I think that I think it's about sort of being adrift in the universe almost. So I can see why you're drawing parallels to free will, right? So it's almost like, the deities above don't give a shit. They're this uncaring presence, right?
Yeah. But all right. So I did not read that this song was about that book, so I'm going to kind of continue with my interpretation, which was a much more personal interpretation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I will concede to you that is the case, that you've found substantiation for that, and so maybe I'm completely assigning meaning to this that Peart did not intend. However, I really saw this as kind of, my fucking daughter died, my wife died inside of a year, and I'm just kind of looking around saying, like, you know, what, like looking around to like the cosmos saying, like, what did I do wrong? Was it something I said? And the cosmos is looking back blankly. And
yeah, that's exactly
really,
it. Yeah.
And that really is, I think, in so many ways, the exact opposite of what he was articulating in Free Will. It's the same, you know, in some ways, the same deeply atheistic underpinning.
Yeah.
But in this case, it is the discomfort and kind of existential dread that can come with atheism.
Well, it's the indifference of the universe on
Exactly
your
right.
life. And some people have, the fates are kind to them and others they aren't. And it depends on the time of day or the time of your life. And the thing is, you're probably right in that assessment, right? But I think it goes a little bit deeper in that, you know, the book, this was a book that he read, obviously.
Yeah.
When he read it, I don't know. He might have read it while he was bereaving the death of his wife and his daughter. He might have read it beforehand, and he might, you know, how I was saying earlier, you know, if you're ever in a moment of grief, I recommend those two books that you could reach for to help you make sense of it. He may have read it before, and he may have reached for it again, and he found it, you know, very apt and poignant to how he was feeling, and felt, you know, that is in line with the theme of this album, what I'm feeling. So I'm going to write a song about that book because it inspired me and it helped me sort of process things. And so I think it can be both. It could be he's summoning the grief that he's had and being one of the characters in this novel. But he's also writing and inspired by the novel.
Yeah. I guess the free will, I just want to say one more thing about this kind of free will and this song, Stars Look Down, the interesting contrast between those two. Think about I'm just off the top of my head, one line from Free Will. You know, I will choose the path that's clear. I will choose free will. Right, like right there in the chorus. In this one, there's this section that says, like a rat in the maze who says, watch me choose my own direction. Are you under the illusion the path is winding your way? Are you surprised by confusion when it leads you astray? I mean, this is in a really interesting way, kind of exactly the opposite of that bold confidence that he's expressing in Free Will. This is kind of like, you know, the in some ways the what's the word I'm looking for? How futile it is to try to make sense of finding your own path. You know,
I like that. I like that he's exploring similar themes from different angles, right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe because the book was written in 1935, he may have read it before he wrote Free Will, for all we know, and it might have inspired him there. And then he saw a parallel to this point in his life as an older person. He's now seeing a different, you know, a different perspective on that. But really, these lyrics, I think, are some of the most impactful and interesting to me off of the album. It's just really, because it's just, I mean, he really captures the indifference of the universe in lyrics.
It's just so uncharacteristically dark. You know, when you read lyrics like this on this, or listen to lyrics like this on this album, you realize how Peart really just never wrote dark lyrics.
But it is reflective, though. I mean, like when I could see him and the stars look down, like he's like shrugging, just like with Peaceable Kingdom, he's shrugging. Yeah, you know,
it's undeniably the same person that wrote lyrics on these other albums, but it is a very, very noticeable shift in tone. And understandable, right? I mean, it is 100% understandable. I actually am.
Golly, Neil, why don't you take that frown and turn it upside down? Why are you so gloomy, pal?
This is one of the things I like best about this album is it really does. It is just the opposite of clinical in the way that I think Peart, like I said before, one of the criticisms I think you can make about Peart is just a little clinical. This is just not.
But this album, and I'm talking about the album here, right? It stands alone in Rush's catalog. It really does. It is unlike any other album they've ever made or will make. Yeah. And it really is their rawest emotional album. Yeah. And maybe the fact that it came out muddled is like poetic, right? Maybe
in some ways,
honestly, maybe it was meant to come out that way. And then more healing happened and they went back. I mean, 11 years later, they went back to remix it. Like bands don't usually do that. I mean, you might remaster it and stuff like, but to remix it, like that's like rare, especially a band like Rush.
Yeah. All right, Ralph, let's talk about the music real quick here. So my opinion, again, this is another very riff driven song. It really feels as though they kind of came up with a collection of riffs, and that really is what is kind of like carrying the music, tying it all together. But in this one, I think that this is one of the better choruses on the album vocally. I think one of my criticisms about some of the latter era albums that Rush put together is any of the kind of catchiness, memorability of vocal lines that they had at various points of their careers, kind of they lose in some of these latter albums. This one I think is a very interesting chorus. It's pretty memorable, but it's very unusual for the band. But that being said, I think it's pretty, memorable. That like, what is the meaning of this?
And he does go into the falsetto again there, like he did.
I know.
What is the meaning of this?
Yeah,
he did in One Little Victory.
It's interesting. He's clearly approaching the vocal lines in a very different way on this album. And this is one of the spots where I actually feel like it works pretty well for me.
Okay, well, all that matters is what you think. So I don't have anything to add.
Do you have anything to talk about with the music here?
No, I again, the chorus I think is really strong in this. And I just it is a haunting song. It really, the music isn't as haunting. I guess it is. It kind of has this quirky dun 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 dun. It might have a little bit of a quirky, haunting sort of heavy riff to it. But I am again looking forward to listening to this again. And I do that like after we do these episodes, I do go back invariably and listen to certain songs because I'm seeing it in a different light with additional context. And I'm excited to do that for both Peaceable Kingdom and The Stars Look Down.
Yeah. Okay.
And Ghost Ride and this whole album, honestly.
All right. So shall we move on to How It Is?
Yes.
Why don't you give us a
Heidi ho there, folks. How It Is off of Rush's Vapor Trails comes in at 4 minutes, 5 seconds. Why don't we give it a listen?
It's such a cloudy day. Seems we'll never see the sun. Feel the day has possibilities. Floating in the moment, the light of imagination. See how it is and how it ought to be. Sweet how it is and how it ought to be.
So this song, and we'll get into the lyrics in a second. This is the closest, and mark my words here, this is the closest we will get to a Rush folk song.
Okay.
Discuss.
Okay. That's interesting. Do you want to talk about the music first, or do you want to go over the lyrics?
Let's go to the lyrics. Let's stick with it. The lyrics.
All right. So lyrically, I am going to say that this feels, I'm probably going to say this again and again. I don't know that I'm going to be able to stand by it. This is an exceptionally personal set of lyrics. This feels very, very confessional, but it almost is like a confession to himself for behavior that is just so uncharacteristic of him. It's like the whole song is like an elegy for the loss of optimism. He's just basically saying, you sometimes are really pessimistic and depressed and feel like nothing is going to work out and everything sucks. And that's just the state of life. And what you would expect in many other Peart lyrics is you'd get to that last stanza of the lyrics and he'd somehow twist that.
Yeah.
He'd somehow make you feel like, oh no, but it's actually not really like that, or somehow it's going to turn or anything. That is 100% not what happens at the end of these. It's just like he literally says the last two lines, that's how it is, another cloudy day. And it really just feels like him kind of saying, fuck, I have felt like shit for a really long time. And this is just going to, I can't help it. It's going to be the way it is. And that's life. And
but it's hard to, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
And then and it just, kind of unapologetically leaves you with nothing other than that. Right.
Well, this is one of those songs where it's hard to talk about the lyrics without the contrast of the music, because what you're saying is also sung very perky and melodically in the music. And like many of the songs on, I mean, this is clearly a song about grief, about reconciliation, about reflection, about optimism in the face of adversity. I think on the whole, it's optimistic. Like Grace Under Pressure was just bleak and dark. I think this is bleak and dark in many respects, but I think on the whole, it's about healing, and it's about all the feelings and the process of healing and bereavement. And this song, I think, really captures it better than any on the album, what the album's about, because it does have very dark, very sort of shit happens, like real shit happens, not just shit happens, but it's done with this very melodic, it's the most melodic song on the album, I think. Even has like an acoustic introduction and an acoustic beginning, but it's very it's resolute. It's accepting the world as it is. That's what a lot of it is. And if you read the book, I don't know did you ever read Ghost Rider?
I haven't read Ghost Rider yet.
These are all themes that are about Ghost Rider. It's not about being healed necessarily. It's about it's basically healing as acceptance. Is processing what had happened, learning to live with yourself, learning to live in the world with such a gaping hole in who you've been. Yeah. And this song is, I think this song is a really, it's a really useful song, right? If you ever want to sort of put things in perspective, even the Stars Look Down. Stars Look Down is a little darker, but How It Is a really useful song because it's a really great song to just put life in perspective. And I think that's
shitty, depressing perspective.
Well, but I think, but it's got an upbeat feel, not like in a Prozac-y way. Like
the music, you mean?
Yeah. And I may have mentioned this before. There was a John Keeks book, not Keats, but Keeks. It's a philosophy book. It's called Facing Evil. Yeah. And it essentially is about, how do you deal with evil in the world? Some people, put their hands to the heavens and say, why, God, why? Like, and that's why it's never resonated with me personally when people are like, why does God let wars happen? Why would God take so-and-so? I'm like, that's not God. Like God is in how you process it and how you grow from that and how you, in my opinion, right? But it basically, what it's about is like, what? Evil exists in this world and you're better off understanding it, knowing how to spot it, knowing how to avoid it, knowing how to deal with it, process it, not questioning it and wishing it away. Right. Yeah. There was actually a line, fools try to wish it away, talking about the nuclear bomb. But it's in this song is very Keatsian. You always hear Keatsian, but Keatsian. It's very, in line sort of facing evil. And it's basically accepting and saying, but there's also good in the world. And, you take the good with the bad.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Ralph. Well, listen, should we move on to the last song on side B, which is Vapor Trail?
Yeah. It's the title track, so we should probably review it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's do it. It is 4 minutes and 57 seconds. Let's just dive right in. All right, Ralph. So listen, I am going to dive right into the lyrics here. Beautiful lyrics, but like my first comment in my notes here was "Oi, Neil." It was just so sad. I mean, I just was. It is just like, you know, he uses this kind of stratospheric, you know, astronomical metaphor throughout the lyrics, but it is just unsurprisingly very dark, uncharacteristically very dark, but it is unrelentingly dark. It is a dark fucking set of lyrics. For example, here is a line that struck me that I was just like, oh my God, who is this Neil Peart that we're dealing with? Silence all the songbirds, stilling by killing frost. Forests burn to ashes, everything is lost. I mean, that is just like, Neil, I feel for you, man. Like, you just want to give this dude a hug. It really is tough to go through these lyrics.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, this is probably the bleakest because it's the most personal.
Yeah.
Stars Look Down is bleak, but it's arm's length, right?
Yeah.
It's a third party take that resonated with him, but this is deeply, deeply personal.
Yeah, it is really. I mean, there's it doesn't take a kind of a English a poetry teacher here to interpret it. It is a powerful, clear, and I would say crushing meditation on impermanence. That's really, it's just about impermanence. Vapor Trail, as you talked about at the beginning of the episode, is kind of this metaphor that he uses for the traces that remain when something is gone, generally speaking. And I think that's, you know, in the case of Neil here, it's the traces of sorrow, of memory, of regret, that he's dealing with, you know, after the loss of his daughter and wife.
Yeah. And it's just, you know, what's interesting is because lyrically, there's a lot of repetition, which is obviously a lyrical tool in a vapor trail. Mm-hmm. And it is this sort of the way when you read it, especially if you read the lyrics, the way it's presented, if you were reading it as like poetry, that repetition is almost like a cry for help. I don't want to say help, but it's almost like a wailing, right? It's pain, right? That repetition of in a vapor trail is sort of like the despondency of loss, right? Where, you know, it was actually represented really well in at the end of the way Liam Neeson did it at the end of Schindler's List, where he's like, he has this lost look in his eye and he's like, this pin could have been two more people at least, right? And this despondency of loss, right? That's what I see when I actually see the lyrics written, and when you hear the way Getty's singing it too. Yeah.
Yeah. It is dark. So, all right, you talked a little bit about Getty's the vocal performance here. Should we move into the music?
Yes.
Okay. So I feel like the in this song, it really struck me that the chorus just had almost no connection to the music in the verses. I don't know whether this is true, but it struck me as though the chorus was a song fragment that they had laying around. The verses were another song fragment, and they just really kind of jammed them together in here in a way that it did not work for me. It felt disjointed.
It was. In fact, I mentioned this in a brief pause we had there. I had to play the track again to remember which track it was, because I felt the music was unremarkable. And it was, you know, you could say, if you want to put a positive sheen on it, that the music is as despondent as the theme of the song.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying there. I mean, I feel like the verses have kind of a nice feel. I like the bass in the verses, but overall it just wasn't coherent. And I think this is an example of a song on this album where, although the lyrics are incredibly dark, I think they're quite they're quite lovely and moving. And I feel like they're really undersold by this music. I think the music just is not giving them their due. And I gotta say, I have to kind of pin that on Getty and Alex. In this case, I feel like given how emotional these lyrics were across the board on this album, I think they should have adopted a different, no one asked me. I may be a dope. I think they should have adopted a different songwriting approach for this album, where Getty and Alex took the lyrics complete and then went away and wrote music to the lyrics based on the content of the lyrics. And I think that would have resulted in a darker album, a sadder album, but a more coherent album, I think.
I agree. I totally agree.
Well,
and I think that for musically, I don't have much more to say about this song because it's the one that, and this ends side B, right?
Yes, this ends side B, my friend.
So this was the one song where I listened to it multiple times because I couldn't quite connect with it.
Yeah.
And it's rare that I can't connect on any level, even if it's not a positive connection, even if it's like sort of like, I don't like that, like dog shears. I couldn't connect on any level with this song. Musically, lyrically, yes, but musically I couldn't.
Yeah. And I think that's the real tragedy of I mean, listen, we're not through the album yet. That's the tragedy of this album. I think that this is the lyrics, not across the board, but in many, many places, are the best lyrics that Peart has written in many, many years at this point. And I would argue some of the best lyrics of his career because they are so uncharacteristically honest and raw and personal. But I really just think that, it's tough to, I think the rest of the album just doesn't rise anywhere close to the level of lyrics that the rest of it just didn't come together. And I think it's a shame in a lot of ways because you hate to, listen, you hate to wish tragedy on any artist, right? You would never do that. However, there's no question that some amazing, amazing albums and other works of art have come out of places of real darkness and tragedy. And I think that this was that moment in Peart's career. And unfortunately, I think Getty and Alex kind of didn't quite match that moment, at least in my opinion.
All right.
So we're at the end of side B.
We are.
Wow, that was dark, and I would love to be able to say it's going to get lighter in the second half, the second disc of this 2-disc 4-sided album, but it doesn't. We are going to start off in the next episode with track 1 of side C, which is Secret Touch, and man, not giving away too much, but it is dark. So, Rafi, why don't we just wrap it up for this episode? Can you tell all of the many fans where they can send their, pleas for help after reading all these lyrics?
First of all, if you or someone you know is experiencing thoughts of depression or suicide, please reach out for help. But we are Backtracking Rocks on X. We are backtrackingrocks@gmail.com if you'd like to email us. We're on Instagram as you guessed it, Backtracking Rocks. So find us there, follow us, like us, subscribe. We are beholden to the algorithms, and the more you share, the more you like, the more you comment, the more you tell a friend. If you don't like someone and you want to make them feel like shit, send them this episode.
That's right.
Yeah. So reach out. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to hear what you think.
All right, excellent. Well, Rolf, listen, it's been fun. It's been as fun as it can be with lyrics like this and content like this that we're dealing with. But I appreciate being on the journey with you, my friend. I will see you next episode. America will both see you or hear you or talk to you next episode. So have a good one.